Hi, and welcome to Let's Read This Month's Gourmet, a new feature on the Amateur Gourmet in which I share with you my thoughts about this month's edition of Gourmet Magazine, the only food magazine that I subscribe to. This month's issue is the June 2008 issue, and it has a beautiful pork sandwich on the cover. I think it's a fascinating subject to talk about the cover image on a food magazine. When you look at Gourmet Magazine, it's difficult not to admire the actual craft and beauty of a lot of its cover images. I mean, this picture is just so perfectly focused, but not only that, just the aesthetics of the cover, the blue background contrasting with the colors of the sandwich, and just the way everything's arrayed, the coleslaw like dripping across the pork pieces, and then the bun just perfectly placed. This is the sort of cover that makes people buy magazines, which is why they pay photographers to take pictures like this. It's also incredibly seasonal. I think that if you look at the cover and you were asked, what month is this, I think you might very likely guess June. And I think that's definitely on purpose, and they understand that as it gets warmer, people want food that they like to eat in warm weather months. But they also have to put something on the cover that's not too healthy or too trendy, and a pulled pork sandwich is just the perfect thing. I think this is a very smart, satisfying cover. Okay, let's go inside. So this is Ruth Reichel's letter to the editor, and it's pronounced Reichel in case you're one of the people who call her Ruth Reichel, Reichel. And this month she's writing about all the cookbooks that come out every year. She says there are over 24,000 cookbooks that come out each year, and that most of them disappoint her. And it's actually a surprisingly candid essay about how she's not that impressed by most cookbooks. Usually when editors-in-chief write a letter to the reader, it's usually kind of PC, the kind of thing that they say, they usually say something that's about Thanksgiving or about cooking with family and how wonderful that is. And that's the nice thing about Ruth Reichel. She's not afraid to take risks. And here she's basically saying most cookbooks suck. But the only thing that I thought was funny is that she says there's nothing worse than having a cookbook with bad recipes. When you fail with a recipe from a cookbook, it's almost impossible not to think it's your fault. I hate to say it, but I've actually failed trying to make one of her recipes from one of her books. It was from one of her memoirs. I think it was her first book, and I tried to make the almond tart, and I could put a link to it at the bottom of this, but it did not come out. Sorry, Ruth. One of the things that frustrates me about Gourmet Magazine is that they always have a beautiful picture of a dish right when you get past all the advertisements at the beginning, and here it's a gorgeous looking cobbler, and while it's fresh on your mind, the first thing you want to know is, how do I make that? And then you turn the page and it has no recipe, and that's because to get the recipe for this dish on the Good Living page, you have to read the fine print, and it says recipe on page 44. This is page 23. So why is the recipe on page 44? I don't really understand that. I've never understood it. If you are going to do like a glamour shot of a beautiful recipe like this, you want to make people hungry, you want to make them cook it, I'd say just put the recipe on the next page. Okay, Gourmet? Okay, this is just a personal pet peeve. It has nothing to do with Gourmet Magazine. It's most food magazines in the summer have grilling. Here's a whole thing about charcoal grilling. And I live in New York. What am I supposed to do? I mean, I guess I could buy a grill and go to a park, but I'm never going to do that. And Mark Bittman today in the New York Times had an alternative, which is to use the broiler. But cooking with a broiler and cooking on a grill are two very different things, and most of these recipes are designed for charcoal grilling, where you have a giant dome and you can put big cuts of meat on there. And so I usually spend my summers frustrated reading the food magazines, wishing I could grill. One of the recipes that stood out for me in this issue of Gourmet is the crab cake recipe. Craig is actually a big crab cake snob, because when he goes with his family to this cabin they rent on an island in the Pacific Northwest, they catch crabs from the water, and then they make crab cakes that are mostly crab and not a lot of breading. And he gets frustrated when he gets a crab cake that's almost all breading. And sure enough, here in the beginning of this recipe, it says that these meaty beauties are what we want, not the bready hockey pucks that dot many menus around the country. And so this is a recipe with mostly crab. So I'm going to buy some jumbo lump crab meat in the next week or so and try to make my very first crab cakes at home. Let's see how that goes. One of the things that's difficult to ignore with Gourmet Magazine is just the beautiful pictures. And this is this sort of shows how magazines are not just about giving you recipes. It's also sort of about making you feel like you're living a certain lifestyle. I mean, you know, obviously these pictures are doing just more than making you hungry, and I think it's supposed to sort of make you feel like you are above the rest of the world in some way. I mean, I know that sounds silly, but you know, if you look at some of the more populist food magazines, whether it's Rachel Ray or Paula Deen's magazine, I mean, there's nothing in there that resembles these kind of pictures, and I think the reason for that is that most working people just want to get home and make dinner, and they're not looking for this sort of escape to another world. And I think people who read Gourmet are sort of trying to enter a different sphere of existence, sort of trying to elevate themselves in some way. And I think that's part of Gourmet's appeal. I think that's why Ruth Reichel is the editor-in-chief, because she has such a pedigree. And I think that, you know, Gourmet is a lot like the New Yorker in the sense that I think people who read it feel like it elevates them in some way. And you know, as much as I personally don't like to think of myself as a snob, I often do feel a little bit snobby when I get my Gourmet in the mail and not my Paula Deen magazine, but maybe that's just me. Finally, I think the best last page of any food magazine is actually Gourmet's. Most of the food magazines have a last page that disappoints in some way. I like when, sorry this is shaking so much, I like when Bon Appetit does an interview with a celebrity about their favorite foods. I think that's interesting. And I don't really like the back of Savoir magazine. I think that it's really weird that it's just one picture. I've said that before on here, but it doesn't do much for me. But the back of Gourmet always chooses one theme and then gives you a bunch of delicious recipes for it. And this month's theme is brownies. And there's coconut blondies, deep chocolate brownies, walnut cherry brownies, peanut brittle brownies. And I am just about to go make some coconut blondies because the recipe sounds so good. And I have people coming over tomorrow and I want to serve them something delicious. So this has been my first episode ever of Let's Read This Month's Gourmet. I hope it inspired you to give a look at this month's Gourmet, and let's see if we do it again next month. Thanks for watching.